My mother, a tattoo artist, covered me with tattoos. Hello, everyone. My name is Kaylee. Do any of you have a tattoo artist as a mom? I agree, this is generally rare, but I have one. And yes, she covered me with tattoos herself. How did this happen? Now I will tell you. All you have to do is like the video of my story. Do not forget to share it with your friends, write comments under the video, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. So initially, my mother is an artist. She has always drawn beautifully, and she has a great talent that can be envied. She didn't really like studying at school, but she excelled at drawing lessons. She was even better than the teacher. She always drew wall newspapers, posters, in general, actively participated in the creative life of the school, for which she was given good grades. She then went to an art institute or something. My mom was the best there, and 2 years later, she met a guy named Chris. She fell in love with him at first sight, but her parents were against it. My mother trusted her heart, so despite the prohibitions and reproaches, they got married. And then I was born. Yes, these are my parents. My father was from a poor family, which is why my grandparents still do not accept him, although it has been a very long time. It was really hard for them. They didn't earn much, and they still had to study. Anyway, my dad dropped out of school and went looking for a job. He drew portraits to order, but this money was still not enough, so he decided to try doing tattoos. At first, this idea seemed dubious to my mother. Plus, you also had to pay to be trained. But they took a chance and Dad learned, and then gradually began to take orders. And things went well. After a few years, he worked in the best salon in the city, on a level with other professionals. And a few years later, he had his own tattoo studio. By this time, we were well on our feet. I grew up, went to school, and my mother, so as not to sit idle, also decided to go to work. She was looking for a job by her profession, as she had a diploma, but nothing good was found. And when she came out of the 30th unsuccessful interview, she came up with an interesting idea. Mom went to Dad's work, brought him lunch, and watched as he finished giving a tattoo to one of his clients. When Dad finished, he asked how her work was going. My mom sadly replied that she wasn't working, and then she was like, "Teach me how to do a tattoo." Dad almost choked on his food. This statement was very unexpected. He asked if she was sure that she wanted this, and my mother said a firm yes. From that moment on, they worked together. My father taught my mother. She practiced first on artificial leather, then began to gain a client base. Since my mother had talent, she also learned quickly. I was proud of them because they were able to stand on their own 2 feet and provide food for our family. When the school found out how my parents worked, the teachers were outraged, made unhappy faces, and the guys threw questions about whether she could get them tattoos and why I don't have any. I never thought about that before. I thought it was optional, even though my parents have tattoos, a few of them. I came home and immediately said that I wanted a tattoo. My mom and dad lost their minds. At first, they were indignant for a long time, but then they realized that they could not say no. You can understand why. Then my father said that he would allow me to get a tattoo with one condition, that it would be done either by him or by my mother. And I agreed. I was given until the weekend to choose a drawing and think about it properly, as well as to consult with my parents. All week I was racking my brain, choosing a large, then a small drawing. I could not decide. Then my mother came up to me. She advised me to make a small one, try to get used to it, to the sensations. To be honest, I was scared. Although my parents told me in detail how the process would take place, I was still worried, but it was normal. Then came Saturday. I went to the salon with my parents and asked my mother to make my first tattoo, and she agreed. They asked me again if I was ready and if I had made a conscious decision, and when they said yes, my mother invited me to sit down. In fact, I was more worried, and after 30 minutes, I had a tattoo of a small flower on my arm. It looked neat, unassuming, and I was pleased. It took about a week for the tattoo to heal. It itched, but I took good care of it. At first, I couldn't get enough of it. It's like when you buy yourself a cool new thing, only this is always with you. I often got questions from my friends. What if the tattoo gets boring? What to do then? In general, they can be taken off, but why? That is why my parents asked me if I was sure about the choice of the tattoo and if my decision was really consciously made. When everything was completely healed, the thought crept into my mind. What if I had more? My father and mother asked the same questions and invited me to the salon. This time I made a bigger drawing on my leg. I had a wolf's mouth all over my thigh. This drawing was in color, so I was worked on for several hours in a row, and not at once. My mother did a great job. She clearly displayed all the details, like she did with all her clients. In some places I was a little sore, but in general, the sensations were tolerable. Finally, when the work was completely finished, there was another drawing on my leg, and it looked just bomb. And the funny thing is that 6 months later, I thought about another tattoo. It became like an addiction. My father told me about it. Lots of his clients often come for him for new tattoos after getting one. So, in a total of 2 years, my mother gave me about 20 tattoos. My arms, legs, stomach, neck, and lower back were all clogged up. At school, my teachers told me off, but my parents stood up for me, and that was what I liked the most. Do I consider my body beautiful? Yes, but it also warms me to think that my mother did all this work for me. Isn't it wonderful? Now her work will always remain with me. Would you take a chance like this? What would you tattoo yourself with?
Howdy, my name is Homer. Tell me guys, do you have a favorite drink? How is it, and why do you like it? It can be anything, for example, water, apple juice, or even mulled wine. Write here in the comments under the video about it, and I'll tell you about my favorite drink. I will say at once that the repetition of my habit is dangerous for you. Why? You'll find out now. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. It was like this. When I was born, my parents were prophesied that I should be a special child. I do not know why our relatives thought so, but in principle, they were right. It's all about my body, but I'm not like everyone else. I'm just a little bit different from you, I'm sure. Why? You'll find out now. Yes, I did not finish. At first everything was normal, usually. I grew up and learned to walk, eat, hold a spoon, then became even more mature and went to school. And one day, I got really sick. I was terribly tired. I didn't want to eat anything. I was infuriated by everything, and I began to lose weight rapidly. What only my mother did not invent. Horror. She dragged me to hospitals, even tried traditional medicine. My father brought me my favorite snacks and sodas after work, but my body refused to take them all. My parents were almost desperate, because it had already been 4 days, and I didn't eat anything, only occasionally drank water. Then my father was advised to take me to an old elderly doctor who lived very far from our house. That old man had a lot of experience in medicine, just in the field of children, and my mother did not hesitate, took me in his arms, and he and my mother took me to him. On the way there, Dad remembered that he didn't fill up the car, and we stopped at a gas station. As soon as Dad started refueling, I suddenly smelled such a delicious smell, like sniffing the most delicious burger on earth. I wanted to smell it and smell it. I even opened the door slightly and stuck my head out. My mother was surprised and asked what was the matter. I almost didn't have the strength to speak, and all I said was that I liked it. My mother opened her eyes wider and opened the door even more for me. As soon as Dad filled up, he closed the doors and we left. Mom asked Dad if he could smell food nearby, but Dad shook his head. I made a face, like I want that smell again. Dad turned the car around and we went back. I opened the window and got high again. Suddenly Mom says, he likes the smell of petrol. Dad couldn't believe it, but it was true. I liked the smell of it. We stood there for 20 minutes and then I had the strength. I asked for a burger. We stopped at a cafe and ate, and I felt better, but not for long. We decided not to go to the doctor. My parents decided that everything was fine and we returned home. At night, I woke up with a familiar feeling of hunger, but I didn't want food. I wanted to smell the petrol. I got out of bed and went to my father's garage, opened the tank to where my father kept a little petrol, and began to smell it. I felt better again, and then I wanted to taste it. I know you're going to wince. It really was very bitter with a bright smell. I took a very small sip and felt strange. There was a feeling that I had flown somewhere, as if my head was spinning and I was all so light. I had pictures in my head and the feeling that the whole room had been turned upside down. After lying down for 30 minutes, I realized that I was much better and I went back to bed. The very next day, the previous illness seemed to have disappeared. I started going back to school, socializing with friends, and eating normally. Of course, I didn't tell anyone about my oddity so that no one would think I was a drug addict. Well, then I had another attack of hunger and irritability. Without hesitation, I went to the garage and took another sip of my drink. I even laughed at myself that I was a living car that didn't go without fuel. I felt dizzy again and lay on the floor, and then I came to my senses and went on with my business. So a couple of weeks passed, and then I began to notice that my attacks became more frequent, and if earlier I drank my favorite drink only one time a day, now it's twice. It became more difficult for me to explain to my parents where I was and what I was doing in the garage. I was tired of coming up with excuses. In the end, I poured some into a bottle and hid it in my room so that I could drink it without going out. Did I think it was dangerous? Undoubtedly, but on the other hand, I could not do anything about my need because it had become vital. Eventually, after another week, my throats got bigger, and at dinner, my father asked me where all his gas had gone. I said I didn't know, and then I ate. Suddenly, before going to bed, my mother came into my room and smelled the smell of fuel. I had just taken a sip and was lying there so relaxed. She screamed at the top of her voice, and I couldn't move. Looking at the picture, I'm lying on the bed and I can't say a word. Next to me is an empty fuel bottle and a screaming mother. Suddenly I felt so funny. I was lying and laughing, and my mother called an ambulance and my father. The doctors came quickly, took me away on a stretcher, and then I suddenly felt bad. I felt a sharp pain in my stomach. The whole body seemed to hurt from the inside. I couldn't understand why, because I was supposed to feel better? When I arrived at the hospital, I started to panic. And what if I die? What have I done? Why did you drink petrol? But why did I think about it only after so much time? All of a sudden I felt like guilty myself, my parents, and I wanted to apologize, but I couldn't say anything. Doctors was confused, made me some injections, put on a mask, and then I became terribly nauseous. In general, there is a very unpleasant story happened. I had a gastric lavage and could barely pump myself out. Then I slept for a few hours, and after sleeping, my mother and the doctor stood next to me. She was crying so bitterly, thinking she was going to lose me. I wasn't the only one surprised by what the doctor said. I was shocked by his theory about why I started drinking petrol in the first place and why I didn't like normal people. It's all about my naturally arranged body. No, I wasn't a born drug addict. Listen up. Somehow, when my mother was pregnant with me, she was under a lot of stress. It seems that my grandfather died then. She was very worried about this, and all this affected me. It wasn't noticeable at first, but as my mother says, I always had some need to calm down. Here, for example, when I was very small, I constantly demanded breasts. Then, as I grew up, toys of certain colors. Then I had an interest in stationery. They had to be the same size. That is, if the notebooks are the same, it calmed me down, and then everything passed in the transition age. My parents breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that everything was over, but they were wrong. It was only a respite. A few years later, it caught up with me again. I was looking for something unusual in my subconscious that would distract my stressful body from external factors, and just my parents and I went to the gas station. Yes, the smell of fuel turned out to be a new thing for me, which is not particularly found in everyday life, given that I do not have frequent contact with it. I set myself up for the fuel to help me and tied myself to it. Well, then my strong body demanded more and more of it, until I ended up in the hospital. I asked the doctors why I didn't get poisoned, but this mystery remained unsolved. I was lucky, that's for sure, but if only a little bit more, probably would not have been saved. The thought gave me the creeps. What a fool I was. I almost killed myself. Well, as for my condition, in which I am looking for a need for something, my mother is already looking for a specialist to help me deal with the problem. In the meantime, we tried to turn my attention to more pleasant and useful things, sports. My father signed me up for a gym and gave me a swimming pass. Since I already have so much energy, it is better to direct it in the right direction. I was glad that I had another chance to start a new life, and now I knew for sure that I would not give in to questionable desires. My life is more precious to me. In general, such are the cases. And what do you think? What else can I do to occupy my brain and instill useful habits? Give me some good advice, guys. Thank you in advance. And also, be sure to ask your loved ones for advice if you are drawn to something strange. Well, you never know.